The fluorescent lights in Conference Room 3B of the Pentagon cast harsh shadows across the mahogany table, where Captain Nadia Kensington sat with her hands folded, listening to men in pressed uniforms discuss whether her team deserved to exist. General Harold Bridger stood at the head of the table, laser pointer dancing across budget projections that reduced 5 years of flawless operations to red ink on a spreadsheet. "We're looking at redundancies across special operations," Bridger said, his voice carrying the weight of 4 decades in uniform. "The Precision Strike Unit has performed admirably, but in an era of fiscal constraint, we need to ask ourselves if specialized sniper teams justify their cost when we have 40 Special Forces operators who can perform similar functions." Nadia felt Colonel Patricia Vance shift beside her, but the older woman remained silent. Vance had been the one to recommend Nadia for the unit 5 years ago, back when Olympic biathlon medals still hung fresh on her wall, and the transition from competition shooting to military precision felt like destiny rather than career. "Similar functions, sir?" Nadia kept her voice level, professional. "Our operational parameters are fundamentally different. We provide strategic elimination capability with minimal footprint and zero collateral risk." Bridger's expression suggested he'd heard this argument before and found it wanting. "Captain Kensington, I've reviewed your mission reports. Impressive accuracy statistics, certainly. But when I can deploy a full Special Forces team for the same budget as your 5-person unit, the mathematics become difficult to ignore." "Before we go further into this discussion," Nadia said, meeting Bridger's gaze directly, "I'd like to understand something. Drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from, because maybe you've seen this kind of situation in your own community. Have you witnessed moments where specialized skill gets dismissed simply because it doesn't fit traditional models? Where excellence gets measured by numbers rather than results?" The room fell quiet for a moment. Vance cleared her throat softly. "The point stands," Captain Bridger continued. "I'm proposing a competitive evaluation. Your team against a composite Special Forces unit. 72 hours of field exercises covering the full spectrum of tactical scenarios. If your team can demonstrate clear superiority, you keep your funding. If not, we consolidate resources where they provide maximum return." Nadia felt the weight of 5 careers resting on her response. Lieutenant Vera Holloway, who turned down 3 other positions to join the unit. Sergeant Imani Blackwood, barely 24, but already the best technical operator Nadia had ever seen. Corporal Linnea Strand, who'd left the Norwegian military specifically to join this team. Sergeant Risa Tanaka, whose close-quarters observation skills had saved lives on 4 continents. "How many operators in this composite unit?" Nadia asked. 40, Bridger said without hesitation, "representing our finest Special Forces teams. Major Travis Drummond will lead them. You know his reputation." Nadia knew it well. Drummond had made his opinions about female operators abundantly clear at last year's Joint Training Conference. His assessment had included words like liability and quotas and political correctness, delivered with the confidence of someone who'd never actually worked alongside the people he was criticizing. 40 against 5, Nadia said quietly. "And if we win?" "If you win," Bridger replied, emphasis suggesting he considered this outcome unlikely. "Your unit not only retains funding, but receives expanded operational authority." "But Captain, let me be clear. This evaluation will be comprehensive, observed, and measured against objective criteria. There will be no ambiguity in the results." "Understood, sir. When do we begin?" 2 weeks. Report to Range Complex 7 in Nevada. Colonel Vance will serve as primary evaluator along with Master Sergeant Cross from the Training Division. They'll establish scenarios and scoring parameters. Nadia stood, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "We'll be ready, General. Thank you for the opportunity to demonstrate our capabilities." As she walked out of the conference room with Vance beside her, the older woman spoke softly. "You know what you're up against. Drummond won't make this easy, and Bridger has already written his conclusions." "Then we'll have to write different ones," Nadia replied, "with bullets instead of ink." The Nevada desert stretched endless and hostile under a sun that turned the air into something visible, shimmering waves of heat rising from the tarmac where two helicopters touched down simultaneously. Nadia stepped out first, her team following in practice formation, each woman carrying gear that had been calibrated and recalibrated during 2 weeks of preparation that felt more like 2 hours. Range Complex 7 sprawled across 12,000 acres of terrain that shifted from rocky desert to constructed urban environments to canyon systems that could hide entire platoons. Nadia had trained here once before, years ago, but never under these circumstances. Never with everything on the line. Well, a voice called across the landing zone. Major Travis Drummond strode toward them, 40 men fanning out behind him in a display clearly designed for psychological impact. 40 sets of eyes, 40 weapons, 40 soldiers who looked at Nadia's team like a problem already solved. The precision unit finally arrives. Hope the flight wasn't too rough for you ladies. Nadia set her rifle case down with deliberate care. Major Drummond, your men ready for 72 hours of fieldwork. Drummond's smile carried all the warmth of the desert at midnight. My men are always ready, Captain. Question is whether your team can keep up. 40-5 odds tend to favor the side with actual numbers. Behind Nadia, she felt rather than saw Vera Holloway's slight shift in stance. Vera had served 2 tours before joining the precision unit, had seen combat that made training exercises look like summer camp, and had exactly 0 patience for posturing. Quality over quantity, Major, Vera said evenly. Something we'll be happy to demonstrate. Before Drummond could respond, Colonel Vance emerged from the operations building with Master Sergeant Owen Cross beside her. Cross was old-school military, somewhere north of 50 with a face that suggested he'd seen every trick and tactic twice. His presence was Bridger's insurance policy, Nadia knew. Cross wouldn't grade on sympathy. All personnel, Vance called out, her voice cutting through the tension like a clean knife. Welcome to Range Complex 7. For the next 72 hours, you will operate under full field conditions. Communications monitored, positions tracked, every shot logged and analyzed. This is not training. This is evaluation. Cross stepped forward, his eyes scanning both groups with the same neutral assessment. First scenario begins at 0600 tomorrow. Long-range target identification and elimination. Distance parameters from 800 to 2200 meters. Mixed environmental conditions, including wind variance and elevation changes. 2200 meters, one of Drummond's men muttered, loud enough to carry. That's over a mile. Gonna be interesting to see if they can even spot targets that far. Amani Blackwood, who at 24 looked younger than her rank suggested, adjusted the technical pack on her shoulders. Her voice came quiet but clear. 2200 meters is well within standard operational range. We routinely engage at distances that would make your spotting scopes useless. The soldier who'd spoken, a captain with the name Carlson on his uniform, laughed outright. Routinely engage? Sweetheart, I've been shooting for 15 years. I know what's possible and what's Hollywood. Nadia watched Amani's jaw tighten, but the younger woman said nothing more. Good. Let them underestimate. Let them assume. Assumptions were tactical advantages when you knew how to exploit them. Barracks assignments are posted, Vance continued. Female unit in Building 6, Special Forces Composite in Buildings 7 and 8. Chow, 1800 hours. Briefing at 1900. Questions? Ma'am, Drummond said, his tone suggesting the question wasn't really a question. What are the rules of engagement for this evaluation? Are we operating under standard tactical protocols, or do we need special accommodations? The emphasis on special landed like he intended. Several of his men grinned. Standard protocols across the board. Major, Cross answered before Vance could respond. His voice carried decades of authority that made Drummond's posturing look juvenile. No accommodations, no exceptions, no excuses. You perform or you fail. Same standards I held myself to when I was running operations. Same standards I'll hold all of you to now. Understood, Master Sergeant, Drummond replied, his smile fading slightly. As the group began to disperse toward barracks assignments, Nadia caught sight of one of the younger Special Forces operators watching her team with an expression that wasn't mockery, or dismissal. Lieutenant Felix Carmine, according to his name tape, he looked uncomfortable with the dynamics already developing. Linnea Strand moved up beside Nadia, her Norwegian accent soft. They expect us to fail. They want us to fail. Then we'll have to disappoint them, Nadia replied, thoroughly and without ambiguity. That night, in the sparse barracks that smelled of sand and military-issue cleaning solution, Nadia gathered her team around a tactical map of the complex. Tomorrow would set the tone for everything that followed. Long-range work was their specialty, their edge, the thing that made them irreplaceable rather than redundant. Risa Tanaka traced elevation lines with one finger. Wind patterns here shift hard after on 100. Morning thermals off the desert floor. If we position northwest of the primary range, we get stable air and superior sight lines. Vera nodded slowly. They'll set up in standard formations. Maximum coverage, minimum risk. Predictable, which gives us opportunity, Nadia said. We don't need to match their deployment. We need to exceed their results. Every shot counts tomorrow. Every calculation matters. We show them that 40 rifles firing acceptable shots will never equal 5 rifles firing perfect ones. Dawn came to the Nevada desert like a slow burn, turning the horizon from black to deep purple to that particular shade of orange that promised brutal heat by midday. Nadia had been awake since 04:30, running final calculations on wind speed, barometric pressure, and the way morning light would play across targets positioned at distances most shooters only dreamed about engaging. The range sprawled before them in carefully measured increments. Targets at 800 meters, 1,200, 1,600, 2,000, and finally 2,200 meters. 40 Special Forces operators spread across the firing line in textbook formation, maximizing coverage while maintaining communication protocols that had been refined through decades of doctrine. Major Drummond stood at the center of his formation like a general surveying troops before battle. His confidence wasn't just visible, it was performed, projected for the observers and evaluators who watched from the tower with spotting scopes and rangefinders and clipboards that would determine futures. Nadia positioned her team differently, not spread across the firing line, but clustered in 5 carefully chosen positions that Risa had identified the night before. Northwest elevation advantage, stable air currents, angles that turn distance from obstacle into opportunity. All shooters ready. Colonel Vance's voice crackled through the radio system. First phase is target identification and engagement at assigned distances. You have 30 minutes. Accuracy and efficiency will both factor into evaluation. Commence on my mark. The silence before her mark stretched like wire pulled tight. Mark. 40 rifles began speaking almost simultaneously, a rolling thunder of suppressed reports that echoed off canyon walls. Drummond's men worked with practiced precision, spotters calling adjustments, shooters making corrections, a machine of military efficiency executing exactly as trained. Nadia settled into her rifle with the familiar comfort of coming home. Her Barrett had been custom fitted to her frame, its weight distribution calibrated to compensate for her breathing rhythm, its scope mounted at the exact height where her eye naturally found glass without conscious adjustment. At 1,800 meters, the first target shimmered in heat waves that made it dance and waver. She breathed out slowly, found the space between heartbeats where the world steadied, and pressed the trigger with pressure so gradual it surprised even her when a rifle fired. Hit! Vance's voice confirmed through the radio. Target 7 at 1,800 meters, center mass. Beside her, Vera engaged a target at 2,100 meters with the same smooth precision. Then Linnea at 1,600, Imani at 1,900, Risa at 2,000. 5 shots, 5 confirmations, 5 perfect placements while 40 rifles continued their rolling barrage. Lieutenant Carmine, positioned on the far end of Drummond's line, glanced toward Nadia's team with something that might have been surprise. His spotter said something Nadia couldn't hear, but the body language was clear. They'd expected competence maybe, but not this. Not first-round perfection at distances that pushed the limits of even military-grade equipment. Captain Carlson, the soldier who'd mocked Imani the day before, fired 3 shots at a target barely 1,000 meters out. His spotter called corrections, wind adjustments, elevation changes. The 4th shot finally connected, but by then Amani had eliminated 2 more targets at distances Carlson probably couldn't have ranged accurately. Phase 1 complete. Cross announced 15 minutes into the 30-minute window. All targets at 2,000 meters and below have been eliminated. Remaining targets are 2,200-meter maximum range shots. Difficult angle, substantial wind variance, moving toward mid-morning thermal distortion. This was where mathematics became art, where equipment met expertise, where the difference between adequate and exceptional carved itself into results that couldn't be argued away or explained as luck. Drummond's best shooters engaged the distant targets with deliberate care. Nadia watched through her scope as bullet impacts walked towards center mass. Close. Very close. But close at 2,200 meters meant inches of deviation, and inches meant the difference between elimination and near miss. Vera fired first from their team. The sound of her rifle was different from the others, tuned to a specific harmonic that reduced barrel vibration. 3 seconds after the shot, Vance's voice came through. Hit. Target 12, upper thorax, 2,200 meters exact. The murmur from the Special Forces line was audible even at distance. Nadia caught Drummond turning to look at their position, his expression shifting from confident to calculating. Linnea engaged next, her Nordic precision honed through years of shooting in conditions that made Nevada desert look forgiving. Another confirmation. Then Risa, whose close-quarters specialty seemed at odds with extreme distance work until you watched her calculate angles with the same intuition most people applied to reaching for coffee. Nadia found her final target through scope glass that cost more than some cars. 2,200 meters of air that moved and shifted and played tricks with light. She accounted for Coriolis effect, for the slight downward angle of her position, for barrel temperature that had climbed through repeated firing, for the way her own pulse created micro-movements that had to be timed and compensated for. The trigger broke clean. The rifle pushed back against her shoulder with familiar force. And somewhere across distance that reduced human targets to abstract concepts, metal found metal with precision that erased doubt. Hit, Vance confirmed. Perfect center mass. Target eliminated. The 30-minute window closed with results that created a silence more profound than the gunfire that preceded it. Master Sergeant Cross descended from the observation tower with his clipboard and an expression that revealed nothing. He walked first to Drummond's position, conferring quietly with spotters and reviewing target cameras that recorded every impact. Then he approached Nadia's team. Captain Kensington, Cross said, his voice carrying that particular military neutrality that could precede either commendation or criticism. Your team engaged and eliminated 17 targets in the time it took the composite unit to eliminate 43. Initial assessment might favor numbers until we examine accuracy rates. He consulted his clipboard with deliberate slowness. Composite unit accuracy at ranges over 1,500 meters, 62%. Multiple shots required for target elimination in most cases. Your team accuracy at all ranges, 100%. Single-shot eliminations across the board. At 2,200 meters specifically, composite unit landed 4 successful hits out of 12 attempts. Your team, 5 for 5. Nadia kept her expression neutral, but beside her, she felt Amani release a breath that had been held too long. Drummond approached, his earlier confidence tempered but not broken. Good shooting, Captain. First-round statistics are impressive, but we're not even through day one. Night transformed the Nevada desert into something ancient and merciless. Temperature dropped 40 degrees once the sun surrendered to darkness, turning sweat-soaked uniforms cold against skin and making every breath visible in the starlight that spilled across terrain stripped of all softness by millions of years of wind and time. Phase 2 begins at 2,200 hours, Vance had announced during the afternoon briefing. Night operations across Canyon Sector 3. Thermal imaging allowed, night vision authorized, but remember that your targets will have the same equipment. This phase tests tactical positioning, patience, and the ability to operate when visibility becomes a weapon for both sides. Drummond's 40 operators moved through the darkness like they'd been born to it, spreading through the canyon system in overlapping patrol patterns that military doctrine had perfected through countless operations. Their thermal signatures bloomed in Imani's scope like flowers made of heat, clustered in formations that prioritize coverage and mutual support. They're using standard sweep protocols, Imani whispered in her throat mic, her voice barely audible even to Nadia positioned 3 meters away. Form in teams with staggered intervals. Predictable spacing, predictable timing. Predictable meant exploitable. Nadia had positioned her team across elevated positions that overlooked 3 converging canyon passages, places where rock formations created natural blind spots that thermal imaging couldn't penetrate because the stone itself held and radiated the day's heat, creating visual noise that masked human signatures. Vera occupied the highest position, nearly 50 meters above the canyon floor, where her angle allowed her to observe without being silhouetted against the sky. Linnea had found a depression in the rock face that hid her completely while providing sight lines down 2 separate passages. Risa, whose close-quarters expertise included an almost supernatural ability to remain motionless for extended periods, had integrated herself into a jumble of boulders that looked like terrain until she moved. Contact. Drummond's voice came through the open channel that linked all participants. We have visual on hostile position, northwest quadrant, elevation advantage. Moving to engage. Nadia watched through her scope as 8 of Drummond's men repositioned toward where they believed they'd spotted one of her team. The movement was tactically sound, professionally executed, exactly what training demanded. It was also wrong. The thermal signature they'd identified belonged to a heat pack Imani had positioned 2 hours earlier, wrapped in fabric that made it read humans' eyes on thermal imaging. While 8 operators converged on empty rock, Vera eliminated 2 of their support elements with shots so precisely placed that the simulation vests registered kills before the men wearing them understood they'd been engaged. The suppressed reports of her rifle were swallowed by canyon acoustics that made direction finding nearly impossible. "We're taking fire," someone called over the radio. Source unknown, direction uncertain. Nadia shifted her position with movements so gradual they wouldn't register as motion on thermal imaging, using the rock's retained heat as camouflage while she relocated 15 meters to a new vantage point. Below her, Drummond's teams began falling back to more defensible positions, clustering together for mutual support, which was tactically sound and also exactly what she'd anticipated. Imani, suppressing fire on the eastern approach, Nadia whispered. 3-second burst, then relocate. The brief rattle of Imani's fire echoed through the canyons, pulling attention and focus, making Drummond's men orient toward the sound while Linnea and Risa engage from completely different angles. 2 more simulation vests registered kills. Then 3. Then 5. They're everywhere. Captain Carlson's voice carried an edge of frustration. How are 5 people covering this much ground? They're not covering ground, Lieutenant Carmine responded, his voice thoughtful. They're controlling angles. It's not about where they are, it's about where we can't be. Smart observation from someone who'd probably been underestimated by his own leadership. Nadia filed that information away as she engaged another target. A clean shot at 900 meters through darkness that turned distance into abstraction. The simulation vest lit up with red indicators that meant eliminated in the tactical language everyone understood. 2 hours into the night phase, Drummond called for regrouping. His 40 operators had been whittled to 28 active participants, while Nadia's team remained at full strength, ghosts in the darkness who struck and vanished like the desert wind itself. Master Sergeant Cross observed from a command vehicle equipped with monitors that tracked every participant's position, every shot fired, every tactical decision made. His expression remained neutral, but Nadia noticed he'd stopped taking notes. Just watching now, letting the results speak in the language of coordinates and confirmed eliminations. They adapted. Vera's voice came through the team channel. Tighter formations, slower movement, better discipline. Good. Nadia replied. Let them adapt. Adaptation means they're thinking about us instead of the objective. Thinking is slower than training, and slow is how you lose. The night wore on with a patience that matched the desert itself. Drummond's remaining operators moved with increased caution, which made them easier to predict rather than harder. Caution created patterns. Patterns created opportunity. And opportunity was something Nadia's team had been trained to exploit with ruthless efficiency. At 0300 hours, with dawn still 3 hours distant and cold soaking through gear that had been designed for durability rather than comfort, the final engagement occurred near the canyon's southern outlet. Drummond had positioned his remaining forces in a defensive perimeter, smart tactics for protecting what remained of his numerical advantage. But defense meant surrender of initiative, and initiative was everything in the mathematics of tactical operations. Risa moved first, calculated exposure that drew fire and attention. Simulation rounds sparked off, rock near her position, close enough to validate the threat, but not close enough to connect. While eyes and weapons oriented toward her position, Linnea and Imani engaged from flanking angles, eliminating 4 more operators before anyone understood the perimeter had been breached. Vera took the final shots from her elevated position, her rifle speaking twice in quick succession. 2 more vests lit red. Then silence returned, broken only by wind that had witnessed everything and judged nothing. Phase 2 complete, Vance announced over the radio. All participants return to base for evaluation and rest period before Phase 3 commences at 0800. The walk back through darkness felt different than the approach. Drummond's men moved in tight formation, speaking in low voices that carried undertones of frustration and reassessment. Lieutenant Carmine caught Nadia's eye as the groups converged on the access road, giving a small nod that acknowledged something unspoken. Captain Carlson, however, maintained his skepticism. Night operations favored defensive positioning. He said to no one in particular, but loud enough to carry. Tomorrow's urban scenario will tell a different story. Close quarters, rapid engagement, that's where numbers matter. Nadia said nothing, conserving energy for what remained ahead. Let him believe what he needed to believe. Morning would arrive with its own truths. And truth was something that required no defense because it defended itself through the simple mechanism of being undeniably real. The mock city sprawled across 6 acres of carefully constructed urban terrain, buildings rising 3 and 4 stories high, with windows that stared like empty eyes across streets designed to replicate the chaos of real combat environments. Range Complex 7 had invested millions in creating a training ground that mimicked everything from Middle Eastern markets to European residential blocks, complete with vehicles, furniture, and enough architectural complexity to make every corner a potential ambush point. Phase 3 commences in 30 minutes, Colonel Vance announced from the Operations Center. Urban combat scenario. Objectives include building clearance, hostile identification, and precision engagement in confined spaces. Special Forces Composite will execute standard room clearing protocols. Precision Unit will engage using their preferred methodology. Master Sergeant Cross and I will evaluate tactical efficiency, collateral risk assessment, and overall mission effectiveness. Drummond gathered his remaining operators in the staging area, their number reduced to 28 after the night operations, but still representing a significant numerical advantage. His briefing carried the confidence of someone playing to strengths, urban combat being the bread and butter of Special Forces training. Stack formations, methodical progression, overwhelming firepower in confined spaces, Drummond outlined. We breach, clear, and secure. By the numbers, by the book. This is what we do. Nadia stood with her team in a separate briefing area, studying the 3-dimensional map of the urban sector that Imani had constructed using reconnaissance data and architectural analysis. The city wasn't just buildings and streets. It was angles, sight lines, elevation advantages, and the spaces between structures where precision could accomplish what force could not. They'll move floor by floor, room by room, Vera said quietly. Maximum coverage, minimum blind spots. Textbook urban assault, which makes them predictable, Linnea added, her accent carrying the certainty of someone who'd operated in cities where predictability meant death. They think in terms of horizontal movement. We think vertical. Risa traced a route across the map with one finger. Rooftop access here, here, and here. Overlapping fields of fire that cover their entire approach without ever entering the buildings they're clearing. Imani pulled up wind data and structural analysis. These buildings are concrete and steel frame construction. Solid enough that rifle reports from upper floors will echo in ways that make source identification difficult. We can reposition between shots without them getting accurate reads on our locations. Nadia studied the map with the focus that had won her Olympic medals before military service ever entered her consideration. In biathlon, success came from the marriage of physical endurance and absolute precision, the ability to slow your heart rate after maximum exertion and place shots perfectly while your body screamed for oxygen. Urban combat demanded similar discipline, the capacity to find stillness in chaos. We don't engage their strength, Nadia said. We don't enter buildings. We don't clear rooms. We don't play their game. We position above their operational plane, and we eliminate targets before they understand where the engagement is occurring from. Speed, precision, and repositioning. We're not infantry. We're ghosts with rifles. The 30-minute warning expired into the harsh reality of simulated combat. Drummond's teams moved into the urban sector with practiced efficiency, form and stacks entering buildings through multiple access points, methodical progression that Doctrine had refined through decades of hard lessons learned in real cities where mistakes meant body bags rather than simulation scores. Nadia's team never touched ground level. Vera had accessed the tallest building through an exterior maintenance ladder, establishing overwatch from a position that provided sight lines across 8 different streets. Linnea occupied a mid-level rooftop with angles into alleyways the Special Forces teams would use for covered movement. Imani set up in a position that overlooked the central plaza where multiple approach routes converged. Risa, despite her close-quarter specialty, had found a water tower platform that turned her into an invisible observer with a rifle. First contact came when Drummond's lead element emerged from Building 6, moving toward Building 7 in a textbook tactical advance. Vera's shot caught the point man before his team understood they were exposed. The simulation vest lit red. The man froze in place as Doctrine required, effectively creating an obstacle his teammates had to move around. Sniper, someone called. Elevated position, unknown location. They scattered to cover, good instincts under fire, but cover from ground-level threats meant nothing against shooters positioned 40 feet above street level. Linnea engaged next, eliminating 2 operators who'd taken positions behind vehicles that protected them from horizontal fire, but left them completely exposed from above. Southeast rooftops, Carlson's voice carried urgency. Multiple positions coordinated fire. Drummond adapted quickly, redirecting teams to access upper floors and engage the elevated threats. Smart tactics that might have worked against conventional snipers who held static positions. But Nadia's team moved like water, flowing from position to position using routes they'd mapped during reconnaissance, never remaining where enemies expected them to be. Imani fired from the plaza position, then disappeared through a rooftop access door before return fire could be coordinated. She emerged 3 buildings away 90 seconds later, engaging from an angle that no one had covered because no one expected that kind of mobility. The urban combat that Drummond had anticipated, close quarters intensity where numbers mattered, had transformed into something else entirely. His teams owned the buildings, but Nadia's team owned the space above them, turning the entire urban sector into a shooting gallery where elevation meant absolute advantage. "They're not fighting us," Lieutenant Carmine observed to his team leader. "They're controlling the entire battle space from positions we can't effectively engage." "Then we adapt," Drummond replied, frustration seeping into his professional demeanor. "Split teams. Half continue building clearance, half secure rooftop positions and deny them the high ground." The adaptation was sound, but it required dividing forces that were already diminished. 14 operators continued ground-level operations, while 14 attempted to reach elevated positions, which meant both elements operated at reduced strength, which meant vulnerability multiplied rather than reduced. Risa, from her water tower position, observed the split and communicated coordinates to the team. They're divided. Ground teams exposed, roof teams climbing. Vera eliminated 3 operators attempting to access her building through the same maintenance ladder she'd used. The narrow access point became a fatal funnel where numerical advantage meant nothing and positioning meant everything. Linnea engaged ground teams who'd lost half their covering elements, her shots methodical and devastating in their precision. 2 hours into the urban phase, Master Sergeant Cross called halt for evaluation. The concrete canyons of the mock city fell silent, except for wind that moved through empty windows and stirred dust from streets that had witnessed a masterclass in tactical asymmetry. Cross descended from the observation post with Colonel Vance beside him, their expressions revealing nothing as they consulted tablets displaying comprehensive data on every engagement, every movement, every shot fired throughout the scenario. Composite units successfully cleared 8 buildings, Cross announced. Textbook execution of room-clearing procedures with 0 tactical errors in building penetration or hostile identification protocols. He paused, looking between both groups. Precision Unit engaged and eliminated 19 hostile targets without entering a single structure, without exposing themselves to close-quarters combat, and without sustaining a single casualty. They controlled the battle space through positioning rather than occupation, demonstrating that urban combat superiority isn't always determined by who owns the buildings, but by who controls the space between them. The canyon sector stretched 3 miles from east to west, a labyrinth of red stone carved by water that hadn't flowed in centuries, leaving behind passages that twisted like entrails through rock that had witnessed the birth of mountains. Phase 4 would test endurance, navigation, and the ability to operate when terrain became enemy and ally simultaneously. This scenario represents your midpoint crisis. Colonel Vance briefed both teams as afternoon heat turned the staging area into something resembling a kiln. The Precision Unit will establish defensive positions within the canyon system. Composite Special Forces will conduct search and elimination operations. The objective is simple: survive contact, maintain operational effectiveness, and demonstrate tactical superiority under pressure. Drummond studied the terrain map with the intensity of someone who understood that numerical advantage mattered less in confined spaces where sight lines measured in meters rather than hundreds of meters. His 28 remaining operators represented more than 5-to-1 odds, and canyon warfare favored numbers when properly applied. They've outmaneuvered us on their terms, Drummond told his team during final preparations. Long range, they're exceptional. Night operations, they used patience against aggression. Urban sector, they owned elevation. But in those canyons, elevation means nothing when we can approach from multiple vectors simultaneously. We close the distance, we overwhelm their positions, we prove that when you strip away standoff range, numbers still matter. Captain Coulson nodded agreement, his skepticism from earlier phases transforming into determination. 5 rifles can't cover 3 miles of canyon approaches. They'll have to cluster, and clustering means vulnerability to coordinated assault. Lieutenant Carmine said nothing, but his expression suggested he'd learned enough over the past 48 hours to question assumptions that had seemed obvious 2 days ago. Nadia led her team into the canyon system 2 hours before the Special Forces element would begin their search operations. 2 hours to understand terrain that couldn't be comprehended from maps, to feel how sound moved through stone channels, to identify the places where rock formations created natural choke points and the spaces where mobility became more valuable than fixed positions. Risa moved ahead as point, her close-quarters instincts reading terrain like language. Here, she indicated a passage where canyon walls narrowed to barely 3 meters wide. Natural funnel. They'll use this if they're thinking efficiency. But if they're thinking tactically, Vera countered, They'll avoid obvious choke points and accept slower movement through wider passages that don't expose them to ambush. Linnea studied the canyon walls, tracing paths that would allow vertical movement. We don't have to predict which route they'll use if we can position to observe multiple routes simultaneously. Height still matters, even in canyons. These walls have ledges, outcrops, places where we can establish overwatch on 3 different approaches. Imani activated her tablet, overlaying digital mapping with actual terrain observed through reconnaissance. Wind patterns funnel through the main canyon. Sound will echo and distort direction. Thermal imaging will be compromised by rock temperature variation. They'll have to rely more on visual identification and tactical instinct, which means we make them see what we want them to see, Nadia said. We're not defending fixed positions. We're controlling their decision-making by shaping their perception of where we are and what we're doing. The operation commenced with Drummond's forces entering the canyon system from 3 separate access points, spreading across terrain in a coordinated sweep designed to compress Nadia's team into increasingly limited space. The tactical theory was sound. Even exceptional shooters became vulnerable when forced into positions with no retreat options. What Drummond's theory didn't account for was that Nadia's team had no intention of retreating. First contact occurred 30 minutes into the operation when one of Drummond's eastern elements encountered what appeared to be a defensive position in a narrow passage. They approached with appropriate caution, weapons ready, formation tight. The defensive position was empty except for gear arranged to suggest recent occupation. While they investigated, Vera engaged from a ledge 15 meters above them, eliminating 2 operators before the rest understood the threat came from above rather than ahead. It's a trap, someone called over the radio. They're using decoys and elevated positions. Drummond adapted instantly. All elements, maintain awareness of vertical threats. Map positions as you advance. Deny them mobility by controlling access points. The adaptation was exactly what Nadia anticipated. Special Forces doctrine emphasized learning from contact, adjusting tactics based on enemy behavior. But adaptation took time, and time in tactical operations was measured in seconds that could mean everything. Imani positioned in a slot canyon that provided sight lines down 2 separate passages. Her technical expertise extended beyond shooting to understanding how to use terrain as a force multiplier. When Drummond's central element advanced through the Western Passage, she engaged from a position they couldn't effectively return fire on without exposing themselves to angles from other directions. Linnea operated in constant motion, using her familiarity with mountainous terrain to traverse canyon walls that looked impassable. She'd appear at one position, engage, then vanish into routes that required climbing skills most soldiers never developed. Her mobility made her impossible to pin down, a ghost who struck and dissolved before counterfire could be coordinated. Risa, despite preferring close quarters, had adapted her specialty to canyon fighting by positioning in places where approach routes converged. She didn't need long sight lines when terrain forced enemies into predictable paths. 3 separate times, Drummond's teams found themselves approaching positions where Risa had perfect angles on approaches they couldn't avoid using. 2 hours into the operation, Drummond's forces had been reduced to 19 active operators, while Nadia's team remained at full strength. The canyon that was supposed to trap the precision unit had instead become a maze where every turn revealed new disadvantages. Every passage offered opportunities for ambush. Every attempt to corner the women resulted in casualties that couldn't be sustained. "They're everywhere and nowhere," Lieutenant Carmine observed, his voice carrying something that might have been admiration. "We control the ground, but they control the engagement parameters. Then we force engagement on our terms," Drummond replied, frustration finally breaking through professional composure. "All elements converge on central canyon coordinates. We mass our forces and push through their positions with overwhelming firepower." The convergence was tactically aggressive and strategically questionable. Massing forces in confined terrain created the illusion of strength while actually concentrating vulnerability. When 19 operators moved into the central canyon, where passages opened into a natural amphitheater, they created exactly the situation Nadia had positioned her team to exploit. All positions, Nadia transmitted to her team. Execute convergent fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. 5 rifles spoke in coordinated sequence from 5 different positions that surrounded the amphitheater at varying elevations and angles. The Special Forces teams, concentrated in space designed to maximize their numbers, instead found themselves in a kill zone where numbers meant nothing and positioning meant everything. Simulation vests lit red in rapid succession. Drummond's voice called for dispersal, but dispersal in the confined space meant exposure to additional angles. Within 90 seconds, the entire remaining element had been eliminated, not through superior force, but through superior understanding of how terrain could transform numerical advantage into fatal disadvantage. Master Sergeant Cross observed the entire engagement from aerial drone feeds that captured every movement, every decision, every moment where tactical theory met the reality of execution that exceeded expectation. Evening descended on Range Complex 7 with the weight of accumulated evidence that couldn't be dismissed or explained away through circumstance. In the operations center, Master Sergeant Cross sat before monitors displaying comprehensive data from 4 distinct tactical scenarios, each one telling the same story in different languages of coordinates and confirmed eliminations and efficiency metrics that didn't lie. Colonel Vance stood beside him, reviewing performance statistics that transformed opinion into mathematics. The Precision Unit has maintained 100% operational effectiveness across all scenarios. 0 casualties, perfect accuracy rates, and tactical innovation that consistently exceeded composite force capabilities despite 5-to numerical disadvantage. Cross nodded slowly, his weathered face revealing nothing but his silence revealing everything. 40 years of military service had taught him to recognize excellence regardless of preconceptions about what excellence should look like. These women aren't just competent. They're redefining tactical doctrine in real time. In the Special Forces barracks, Major Drummond gathered what remained of his team's morale. Lieutenant Carmine sat quietly in the corner, his earlier skepticism transformed into something closer to respect. Captain Coulson maintained defiant posture, but his eyes told different stories, the kind that came from having assumptions shattered by undeniable reality. Tomorrow's scenarios are our specialty, Drummond told his assembled operators, voice carrying determination that felt increasingly desperate. Extreme range marksmanship and tactical problem-solving under time constraints. We've trained for these exact conditions. We know what's possible and what isn't. Sir, Carmine spoke carefully, respectfully, but with conviction that came from witnessing what conventional wisdom said was impossible. Permission to speak freely. Granted, Lieutenant. We've approached this evaluation assuming our methods are superior because they're traditional. But maybe tradition isn't the same as optimal. These women have demonstrated tactical capabilities we haven't even considered because we've been too focused on how we've always done things. Coulson shifted uncomfortably. They've had lucky breaks, unexpected advantages in terrain and conditions. Tomorrow's range work strips away environmental variables. Pure shooting, pure skill, pure results. It's all been pure results, Captain, Carmine replied quietly. We just haven't wanted to see them clearly. The tension in the barracks thickened until Drummond stood, ending the discussion through presence rather than words. Get rest. Tomorrow we prove what Special Forces training produces. Dismissed. Across the compound, Nadia's team conducted their own after-action review with less drama and more efficiency. Vera cleaned her rifle with methodical precision that bordered on meditation. Linnea reviewed topographic data for the following day's scenarios. Imani updated technical parameters on her tablet, while Risa performed maintenance on equipment that had functioned flawlessly but required attention nonetheless. They're going to come at us differently tomorrow, Vera observed without looking up from her cleaning. Drummond's too professional to keep making the same mistakes. He'll adapt, adjust, Try something we haven't prepared for. Good, Nadia replied. Adaptation means respect. Respect means they've stopped underestimating us and started actually competing. That's when this evaluation becomes what it was supposed to be from the beginning. Imani glanced up from her tablet. The Extreme Range Challenge is designed to push equipment to theoretical limits. Targets at distances where atmospheric conditions and Earth curvature become significant factors. Even with our accuracy rates, we're talking about margins of error measured in millimeters across distances measured in miles. Which is exactly where training separates from theory, Linnea added. Anyone can hit targets at 1,000 meters with enough practice. But beyond 2,000, you're not just shooting anymore. You're calculating mathematics that most people don't even understand exist. Risa finished her equipment check and looked at Nadia directly. What happens if we win? After all this, after proving everything they asked us to prove, what changes? The question hung in the evening air that had cooled enough to make the barracks comfortable after the day's brutal heat. Nadia considered responses that ranged from optimistic to cynical, from hopeful to pragmatic, and settled finally on honest. We change what's possible, Nadia said. Not just for us, but for every woman who comes after us and gets told she can't do something because tradition says so. We prove that excellence doesn't have a gender, and tactical superiority doesn't come from conforming to expectations, but from exceeding them in ways people haven't imagined yet. No pressure then, Imani said with a slight smile that broke the tension. Just another day, proving we deserve to exist, Vera added, her tone carrying irony and truth in equal measure. That night, Nadia walked the perimeter of the compound under stars that filled the Nevada sky with light that had traveled years to arrive at this moment, this place, this particular convergence of circumstance and choice. She thought about Olympic competitions where fractions of seconds determine medals, about the transition from sport to military service, about the moment she'd been asked to lead this team and the weight of responsibility that came with representing not just herself, but everyone who'd been told they weren't enough. Tomorrow would bring scenarios designed to test the absolute limits of human capability combined with equipment that pushed technological boundaries. Extreme range marksmanship where success and failure separated by inches across miles. Tactical problem solving where seconds mattered and hesitation meant defeat. The kind of challenges that would either validate everything they demonstrated over 3 days or introduce doubt where none had existed before. She found Lieutenant Carmine sitting on a bench outside the operations center, also watching stars, and probably conducting his own internal evaluations of assumptions and reality. Lieutenant, Nadia acknowledged him. Captain, he replied. Hell of a 3 days. Not over yet. No, he agreed. But I wanted to say something before tomorrow. I came into this evaluation believing certain things about capability and gender and what makes soldiers effective. Your team has dismantled every one of those beliefs with performance that leaves no room for argument. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already proven what needed proving. Nadia sat on the bench, maintaining professional distance but acknowledging the honesty in his words. What changed your mind? Watching you operate, Carmine said simply. Realizing that everything I'd been taught about tactical superiority was based on assumption rather than evidence. You don't fight like us because you're not trying to be us. You've developed methodology that's objectively superior in measurable ways. That's not opinion. That's mathematics. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes. Two soldiers from different backgrounds finding common ground in respect for competence and the recognition that excellence transcended categories people tried to impose on it. When they parted, Nadia felt something shift that had nothing to do with scores or evaluations, but everything to do with the harder work of changing minds one conversation at a time. Tomorrow would demand perfection. But tonight, under stars that had witnessed countless human struggles toward understanding, progress felt possible in ways that competition scores could never fully capture. Dawn arrived with the particular clarity that preceded significant moments. Air so still that flags hung motionless on poles, and the only movement came from heat waves already beginning to shimmer above distant rock formations. The extreme range course stretched across terrain that made previous scenarios look modest. Targets positioned at distances that required accounting for factors most shooters never considered. Phase 5 represents the technical pinnacle of marksmanship. Colonel Vance announced to both teams assembled at the firing line. Targets at 1,200, 1,800, 2,400, 3,000, and 3,600 meters. At these distances, you're compensating for Coriolis effect, air density variation, temperature gradients, and ballistic arc that drops bullets dozens of feet below line of sight. Equipment matters. Training matters. But at these ranges, mastery matters most. Master Sergeant Cross stood beside a table, displaying the rifles that would be used, military-grade precision instruments that cost more than luxury vehicles and performed with tolerances measured in fractions of degrees. These are the tools, he said. But tools don't make shooters. Shooters make tools work beyond their specifications. Drummond's best marksmen stepped forward, 8 operators selected for exceptional long-range capability. They trained on similar equipment, practiced these distances, understood the mathematics that transformed shooting from skill into science. Their confidence was earned rather than assumed, built on countless hours downrange and results that placed them among the military's elite shooters. Captain Carlson examined his assigned rifle with practiced familiarity. "This is where theory meets reality," he said quietly to Drummond. "They've been impressive, I'll admit that. But 3,600 meters is over 2 miles. That's not just difficult. It's at the edge of what's physically possible even with perfect conditions." Nadia's team prepared with the same methodical attention that had characterized every previous phase. Vera calculated wind values at different altitudes, knowing that air moved differently at various elevations and that a bullet traveling over 2 miles would pass through multiple wind layers. Linnea checked barometric pressure and temperature, feeding data into ballistic computers that would provide baseline calculations requiring human judgment to refine. Imani assembled her spotting equipment, technology that could measure atmospheric conditions to incredible precision but still required interpretation that computers couldn't provide. Risa, whose role in extreme range work focused on observation and environmental analysis, cataloged every variable that might affect bullet flight over distances where milliseconds translated into meters of deviation. "All shooters to the line," Vance commanded. "You'll engage targets in sequence from shortest to longest range. Each shooter gets 3 attempts per target. Scoring includes accuracy, consistency, and time to first-round hit. Commence when ready." The Special Forces shooters began with the 1,200-meter targets, methodical work that required concentration but remained within conventional long-range parameters. Their shots landed with respectable accuracy, some requiring multiple attempts but all eventually connecting. Professional execution that validated their selection as elite marksmen. Vera engaged the same targets with shots that landed center mass on first attempt. Her breathing control and trigger discipline producing results that looked effortless but represented thousands of hours of practice that made perfection appear natural. Beside her, Nadia placed shots with similar precision, followed by Linnea, Imami, and Risa in sequence that demonstrated not individual excellence, but systematic superiority. At 1,800 meters, the Special Forces' accuracy began showing variation. Wind at that distance created unpredictability that required multiple shots to compensate for conditions that shifted between trigger press and impact. 3 attempts per target became necessary rather than precautionary, and even then some shooters struggled to achieve center mass hits. Nadia's team maintained first-round accuracy that made the distance look routine. Their preparation showed in results that didn't require correction. Bullets landing were calculated based on environmental reading that transcended equipment capability and entered the realm of understanding that couldn't be taught, only earned through experience that made the impossible familiar. 2,400 meters represented a threshold where shooting became as much art as science. Bullets dropped over 30 feet from line of sight, curved by Coriolis effect, pushed by winds that change velocity and direction through their flight path. The Special Forces shooters engaged with visible concentration, spotters calling corrections that produced hits on second or third attempts, respectable performance at a distance that defeated most shooters entirely. "Watch this," Carlson said to his spotter before engaging his 2,400-meter target. He settled into his rifle with the confidence of someone who'd made similar shots before, controlled his breathing, adjusted for wind that his spotter called, and pressed the trigger with the smooth consistency that separated professionals from amateurs. The shot landed 8 inches left of center mass. Close. Very close. But at 2,400 meters, 8 inches represented the difference between acceptable and exceptional. His second attempt landed center mass, validation of his skill and training. He glanced toward Nadia's team with an expression that acknowledged their earlier performance while maintaining pride in his own capability. Imani engaged the same target distance, her youth sometimes mistaken for inexperience by people who didn't understand that talent combined with training could produce results that exceeded age-based expectations. Her first shot landed perfect center mass. So did her second. And her third. Not correction, but confirmation. 3 identical results that demonstrated consistency most shooters couldn't achieve at half the distance. At 3,000 meters, the challenge exceeded what most military operations would ever require. Bullets traveled for multiple seconds, crossing distance where atmospheric conditions varied significantly, dropping so far below line of sight that aiming felt counterintuitive. The Special Forces shooters engaged with determination that produced mixed results, some hits, some near misses, all of them representing maximum effort against extraordinary difficulty. Linnea engaged 3,000-meter targets with precision that reflected her Nordic training in extreme conditions. Her familiarity with long-distance shooting in environments where wind and cold complicated everything translated into capability that turned difficult shots into documented results that required no excuses or explanations. The 3,600-meter targets stood at the absolute edge of practical engagement distance. Over 2 miles away, barely visible even through high-magnification optics, requiring calculations that accounted for Earth's rotation and bullets that fell over 70 feet below line of sight. At this distance, success demanded perfection in equipment, conditions, calculation, and execution, with failure being the expected outcome and success being noteworthy achievement. The Special Forces shooters engaged with full understanding that connection at this distance represented career-defining accomplishment. Their shots produced impacts near targets, some within meters, a few achieving actual hits through combination of skill and favorable conditions. Respectable results that most marksmen would never achieve. Nadia stepped to the line for a 3,600-meter attempt, aware that everyone present understood the significance of this distance. She'd made similar shots before, but never under evaluation conditions where witnesses documented results that would define capability beyond challenge. Her rifle felt like extension of intent rather than separate equipment, familiar weight that she'd carried across continents and through operations that remained classified. Nadia settled into her rifle with the focus that came from years of competition where milliseconds determined medals and military operations where millimeters determined survival. The 3,600-meter target existed as barely more than concept through her scope, a shape that suggested human form but lacked detail that would make it feel real. 2.2 miles of atmosphere stood between trigger press and impact, distance that gave bullets time to drift, drop, and deviate through forces invisible but undeniable. She calculated wind at ground level, mid-flight altitude, and target elevation, each layer moving at different velocity and direction. She accounted for temperature gradients that changed air density through the bullet's path. She adjusted for Coriolis effect, Earth's rotation creating deflection measurable in feet at this distance. She considered barrel temperature, ammunition temperature, even the way her own heartbeat created micro-movements that had to be timed rather than eliminated. The mathematics were complex, but the execution was simple. Breathe, settle, find the space between heartbeats where the world steadied, and pressed the trigger with pressure so gradual that the shot surprised even her when a rifle fired. The bullet traveled for 3.8 seconds, time enough to wonder, to doubt, to question every calculation that had gone into a shot that defied reasonable expectation. Then across distance that made sound delay irrelevant, the target registered impact. Center mass. Perfect placement at a range where most shooters would celebrate any connection at all. Master Sergeant Cross lowered his observation equipment slowly, his expression revealing what words couldn't adequately capture. That was, he paused, searching for appropriate description. Exceptional marksmanship, Captain Kensington. Vera engaged next, her shot following a trajectory calculated from slightly different position and conditions. 3.9 seconds of flight time. Center mass impact. Then Linnea, perfect placement. Amani, identical results. Risa, concluding the sequence with precision that made the impossible look routine. 5 shooters, 5 perfect hits at 3,600 meters. Not lucky shots or favorable conditions, but systematic excellence that transcended individual achievement and demonstrated team-level capability that redefined understanding of what precision marksmanship could accomplish. Captain Coulson stood silent, his rifle still warm from his own attempts that had produced near misses and one glancing hit at the target's edge. Respectable results by any normal standard, but rendered inadequate by comparison to performance that exceeded normal standards entirely. Phase 6 commences in 30 minutes, Colonel Vance announced, her voice carrying undertones of something that might have been satisfaction. Tactical problem-solving exercise. You'll be presented with scenarios requiring immediate assessment and precision solutions under time constraints. This phase tests decision-making under pressure, not just technical shooting capability. The tactical problem-solving course occupied a sector of the complex designed to simulate real-world complications where clean shots didn't exist and every engagement required balancing multiple factors simultaneously. Hostage scenarios where hitting the wrong target meant mission failure. Situations where environmental hazards made certain solutions impossible. Time-critical decisions where hesitation cost lives and haste cost accuracy. Drummond gathered his remaining team members, their number reduced through previous phases, but their capability still representing military excellence by conventional measures. Listen carefully, he told them. This is scenario work we train for constantly. Assess, decide, execute. They may shoot better at extreme range, but tactical problem-solving requires more than accuracy. It requires judgment. Lieutenant Carmine nodded, but his expression suggested his confidence in conventional wisdom had been substantially revised over the past 3 days. Sir, permission to speak. Granted, Lieutenant. We keep approaching this evaluation assuming our methods are superior when the evidence keeps proving otherwise. Maybe instead of trying to beat them at what they do, we should acknowledge what they've demonstrated and learn from it. Drummond's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond immediately. The silence stretched until Captain Coulson broke it with grudging honesty. The lieutenant has a point, sir. We've been outperformed across every metric that matters. Pride is good, but denial is dangerous. The first tactical scenario presented a simulated urban environment where hostile forces held civilian hostages in a structure with limited sight lines and multiple innocents in potential crossfire. Special forces teams approached with doctrine that emphasized aggressive entry, overwhelming force, and rapid resolution. Their execution was professional, achieving simulated mission success with acceptable civilian casualty rates according to standard operational parameters. Nadia's team analyzed the same scenario through different framework entirely. Rather than entry, they identified exterior angles that provided sight lines through windows at ranges most shooters wouldn't attempt in hostage situations. Rather than overwhelming force, they proposed surgical precision that eliminated threats without ever entering the structure or exposing hostages to close-quarters chaos. Their execution produced 0 simulated civilian casualties and neutralized all hostile targets within 90 seconds of engagement initiation. The difference wasn't just in results, but a methodology that challenged fundamental assumptions about how complex tactical problems should be solved. Scenario 2 involved time-critical threat elimination, where targets appeared at random intervals and distances, requiring instant assessment and engagement before they disappeared. Special Forces shooters performed admirably, their training producing respectable accuracy rates and reasonable response times that would succeed in most operational contexts. Imani and Risa worked the same scenario as a coordinated pair, one observing while the other engaged, switching roles fluidly based on target presentation and optimal shooter position. Their coordination produced accuracy rates approaching perfect and response times that eliminated targets before most shooters completed their assessment phase. The third scenario presented environmental complications, shots required through vegetation, around obstacles, in conditions where clean sight lines didn't exist and patience might mean mission failure. Drummond's teams engaged aggressively, accepting reduced accuracy in exchange for maintaining initiative and momentum. Their approach was valid, their execution competent, their results adequate for mission parameters that allowed margin for error. Vera approached the same scenario with patience that looked like hesitation until results proved it was calculation. She waited for moments when wind moved vegetation, when targets presented optimal angles, when complexity simplified through environmental factors beyond control but within prediction. Her shots connected with accuracy that made the scenario's difficulty invisible, problems dissolve through understanding rather than overcome through force. By the time Phase 6 concluded, the evaluation had transcended its original purpose. What began as comparison between numerical strength and precision capability had become demonstration of fundamentally different tactical philosophy, one that challenged decades of military doctrine through performance that couldn't be dismissed as anomaly or luck. Master Sergeant Cross compiled final data with the thoroughness that 4 decades of service had ingrained. Colonel Vance observed over his shoulder, watching numbers accumulate into conclusions that would require careful presentation to leadership invested in conventional wisdom. Tomorrow is the final evaluation, Vance announced to both teams. Hostage rescue scenario combining all previous elements: long-range precision, tactical problem-solving, time pressure, and mission-critical decision-making. Both teams will execute the same mission parameters. Results will be measured against objective criteria, including mission success, collateral damage, time to completion, and resource efficiency. She paused, looking between Drummond's diminished but determined team and Nadia's quietly confident unit. This evaluation has produced results that will require substantial analysis and potentially significant policy revision. Tomorrow provides a final data point in assessment that has already demonstrated capabilities beyond what current doctrine anticipated. Rest, prepare, and understand that tomorrow's performance will inform military training and operational planning for years to come. The final scenario occupied 12 acres of constructed environment that combined urban terrain, natural obstacles, and tactical complexity designed to test every capability both teams had demonstrated over 4 days of relentless evaluation. At the center stood a 3-story structure housing simulated hostages guarded by hostile forces equipped with advantages that made simple assault tactics catastrophically dangerous. Mission parameters are straightforward. Colonel Vance briefed both teams in the pre-dawn darkness that preceded the final evaluation. 12 civilian hostages held by 15 hostile forces in a fortified position. Hostiles have elevated defensive positions, overlapping fields of fire, and explosive devices that will detonate if certain entry points are breached. Your objective is hostage extraction with 0 civilian casualties, minimal hostile casualties where possible, and mission completion within 2 hours from initiation. Master Sergeant Cross stood beside detailed architectural models of the target structure. This scenario replicates conditions our forces face in real operations worldwide. There are no clean solutions, no perfect approaches. Success requires balancing speed against caution, aggression against precision, and mission accomplishment against acceptable risk. Major Drummond studied the models with intensity that came from understanding this final phase would define not just the evaluation, but potentially his career and the future of his operational philosophy. His team had been reduced through previous phases, but those who remained represented the core of Special Forces capability, operators who'd proven themselves across multiple deployments and countless training scenarios. "We go in hard and fast," Drummond outlined to his team. "Simultaneous breach from 3 entry points. Overwhelming force to neutralize hostile response before they can threaten hostages. Standard hostage rescue doctrine executed flawlessly. We show them that when lives hang in balance, aggressive action saves more people than patient observation." Lieutenant Carmine listened carefully, but his question revealed evolved understanding. "Sir, what if aggressive action is exactly what they're expecting? What if the scenario is designed to punish conventional approaches? Then we execute conventional approaches so perfectly they succeed anyway," Drummond replied. "We adapt within our framework, Lieutenant, not abandon everything we've learned because 5 women shoot well at long range." Nadia gathered her team away from the main briefing area, spreading topographic maps and architectural diagrams across ground that still held night's coolness. They studied sight lines, elevation advantages, potential observation positions that wouldn't appear on standard tactical assessments, because standard tactics didn't account for shooters who could engage at distances that rendered conventional defensive positions irrelevant. They've fortified ground level and immediate approaches, Vera observed. Expect aggressive breach tactics, so they've layered defenses accordingly. But their defensive planning assumes threats come from predictable vectors. Risa traced potential access routes on the map. There's a ridgeline 700 meters northwest. Elevation advantage with clear sight lines into upper floor windows. If hostages are being held on lower floors as expected, upper floor hostiles become isolated targets. Imani pulled up thermal imaging data from reconnaissance drones. 15 hostiles distributed across 3 floors. 5 on ground level near hostages, 5 on second floor providing overwatch, 5 on third floor as rapid response element. They're positioned to counter assault, but not to defend against precision elimination from outside their defensive perimeter. Linnea studied wind data and environmental conditions. Morning thermals will be stable for another 90 minutes. After that, desert heating creates turbulence that complicates long-range work. We need to engage early, eliminate upper floor threats first, then compress their defensive capability before they understand what's happening. Nadia synthesized the analysis into operational plan that prioritized what they did exceptionally well rather than attempting what others did adequately. We don't breach. We don't assault. We eliminate hostile capability from positions they can't effectively defend against. Then we extract hostages through gaps their defensive planning didn't account for, because it assumed threats would come from conventional directions. At 0600 hours, both teams initiated their approaches to the target structure. Drummond's forces moved with practice coordination, spreading across terrain in formations designed to provide mutual support while advancing toward breach points identified through tactical analysis. Their movement was textbook execution of doctrine refined through decades of operational experience and countless successful missions. Nadia's team moved in completely different direction, away from the target rather than toward it, climbing elevation that provided standoff distance most tactical planners would consider excessive. Vera established position on the ridgeline 700 meters northwest. Linnea found angles 800 meters east. Imani positioned 900 meters south with technical equipment that would coordinate their fire. Risa and Nadia occupied positions that provided overlapping coverage of approaches and extraction routes. Drummond's breach teams reached their entry points simultaneously. Explosive charges prepared, assault formations ready. Timing synchronized for overwhelming force applied at multiple points to divide hostile attention and prevent coordinated response. The operation proceeded with mechanical precision that should have produced textbook results. Except the hostiles had prepared for exactly this approach. The moment breach charges detonated, simulated explosive devices triggered at 2 of 3 entry points, eliminating half of Drummond's assault element instantly according to exercise parameters. The remaining operators pushed through the third breach point into defensive fire that simulation systems registered as devastating. "We're taking heavy casualties," someone called over the radio. "Hostiles have overlapping fields of fire, prepared positions. We need support." Drummond's reserve element moved forward, but the scenario had been designed to punish conventional approaches. Within minutes, his team was pinned down, with simulated casualties mounting and hostage extraction becoming increasingly unlikely within mission parameters. While Special Forces teams struggled against defenses designed to defeat their methodology, Nadia's team executed an entirely different approach. Vera engaged first, her shot traveling 700 meters through morning air that remained stable and predictable. The hostile positioned on third floor providing Overwatch disappeared from his position as his simulation vest registered elimination. Then Linnea engaged from her angle, eliminating another third-floor threat. Imani followed with precision that made 800-meter shots look routine. Within 90 seconds, all 5 third-floor hostiles have been eliminated without understanding where fire originated from. Their defensive positions, carefully prepared against ground-level assault, provided zero protection against elevation advantage precision fire from ranges they'd assumed were beyond practical engagement distance. Second-floor hostiles, Nadia transmitted to her team. Simultaneous engagement on my mark to prevent warning or coordinated response. 5 rifles spoke in coordinated sequence. 5 hostile forces on second floor eliminated before their simulation systems could register awareness of threat. The ground floor hostiles, isolated now without overwatch or support, found themselves in position designed to repel assault but useless against precision fire that came from unexpected directions. The 5 remaining hostile forces on ground level understood something had gone catastrophically wrong with their defensive plan. Their communication systems registered eliminated team members with clinical efficiency, red indicators replacing green across displays that tracked force disposition. Overwatch gone, support elements neutralized, defensive advantage collapsed through methodology they hadn't prepared for because doctrine said it was impossible. Drummond's pinned teams monitored the same tactical displays with expressions that shifted from frustration to something approaching disbelief. "Someone just eliminated 10 hostiles in under 2 minutes, Lieutenant Carmine said quietly. From outside the defensive perimeter, without breaching, without assault, without exposing themselves to counterfire. Captain Carlson checked his own tactical display twice, as if repetition would change what the data revealed. That's not possible at these ranges with hostages in proximity. The precision required, the coordination needed, the risk of collateral damage. Apparently it's very possible, Carmine replied. We're watching it happen in real time. Nadia transmitted to her team using encrypted channel that linked their positions. Ground floor hostiles are isolated, but still dangerous to hostages. We need to create opportunity for extraction without direct engagement that risks civilian casualties. Imani, can you generate diversion that pulls them away from hostage positions? Affirmative, Imani responded. Give me 30 seconds. She activated technical equipment that generated acoustic signatures resembling assault team movement from the eastern approach, sounds calibrated to suggest hostile breach attempt requiring immediate response. The ground floor hostiles reacted exactly as predicted, repositioning toward the perceived threat, creating gaps in their coverage of hostage positions. Risa, you're clear for extraction approach, Nadia transmitted. Hostages are in northwest corner, currently unobserved. Move fast, move quiet, get them out through the western exit route. Risa descended from her elevated position with speed that belied her careful nature, covering ground in tactical movement that prioritized efficiency over caution because the opportunity wouldn't last long. She reached the structure's western side, where defensive focus had shifted entirely toward the simulated eastern threat. The hostages, role-play by training personnel wearing identification vests, looked up as Risa entered through a window that defensive planning had left exposed when forces repositioned. She signaled silence with practiced hand movements, then gestured toward the exit route that would take them away from remaining hostile positions. Moving 12 hostages now, Risa transmitted. Need covering fire if hostiles reorient. They won't reorient, Vera replied calmly. They're about to have other concerns. The remaining 5 hostile forces, focused on responding to the simulated Eastern threat, presented target profiles that precision shooters dream about. Clustered, exposed, oriented away from actual threat vectors. Nadia coordinated with Vera and Linnea for simultaneous engagement that would eliminate the remaining opposition before they could threaten hostages or respond to the extraction in progress. On my mark, Nadia transmitted. 3, 2, 1, execute. 3 rifles fire in sequence, so tight it sounded like single extended report. 5 simulation vests registered eliminations simultaneously according to exercise parameters. The hostage rescue scenario, designed to test teams against nearly impossible parameters, had been completed with 0 hostile survivors, 0 civilian casualties, and execution time of 4 minutes from initiation to mission completion. Master Sergeant Cross watched from the observation post with Colonel Vance beside him, both reviewing tactical displays that documented every movement, every shot, every decision that had transformed theoretical scenario into practical demonstration of capabilities that exceeded design parameters. For minutes, Cross said quietly, 0 casualties, perfect coordination, methodology that completely bypassed defensive measures designed to defeat conventional assault tactics. I've been evaluating special operations for 20 years, and I've never seen hostage rescue executed with this level of precision and efficiency. Vance nodded slowly, already calculating how to present results that would challenge fundamental assumptions throughout military command structure. The Composite Special Forces team performed exactly as doctrine predicts, professionally and competently within established parameters. But the precision unit demonstrated that established parameters aren't absolute limits. They're baseline assumptions that can be exceeded through alternative methodology. On the ground, Drummond's teams emerged from their pinned positions as exercise concluded, their simulation casualties reset, but their professional pride bearing wounds that data couldn't quantify. Drummond approached the target structure where Risa was coordinating simulated hostage extraction, watching the conclusion of a mission his team had been unable to complete. Lieutenant Carmine walked beside him, neither speaking until they reached position where they could observe Nadia's team consolidating after mission completion. Finally, Carmine broke the silence with observation that couldn't be avoided any longer. So we just witnessed a complete paradigm shift in tactical operations. Everything we've been taught about numerical advantage, aggressive assault tactics, overwhelming force application, all of it rendered irrelevant by 5 shooters who engaged from ranges we don't even train for and completed the mission before we made it through the first breach point. Drummond's jaw worked as he processed reality that couldn't be argued away or explained through circumstance. They didn't just beat us, Lieutenant. They demonstrated that our entire approach to these operations is suboptimal. We're still fighting like it's 20 years ago while they've evolved methodology that makes conventional tactics look prehistoric. Captain Carlson joined them, his earlier skepticism completely absent, replaced by grudging but genuine respect. I need to apologize, he said, though whether to his commanders or to Nadia's team wasn't entirely clear. I came into this evaluation believing certain things about capability and gender and what makes operators effective. I was wrong about all of it. Comprehensively, undeniably wrong. The formal debriefing occurred 2 hours later in the operations center, where video displays showed comprehensive footage from all scenarios across 4 days of evaluation. General Bridger had arrived during the final hostage rescue, his presence unannounced, but his timing suggesting he'd been monitoring results that contradicted the conclusions he'd intended to reach. Master Sergeant Cross presented the data with a neutrality that facts permitted but implications couldn't avoid. Across 6 distinct tactical scenarios, The 5-person precision unit maintained 100% operational effectiveness with 0 casualties. They demonstrated accuracy rates exceeding 98% across all engagement ranges. They completed the final hostage rescue in 4 minutes, compared to projected completion time of 45 to 60 minutes using conventional assault methodology. He paused, consulting comprehensive analysis that reduced 4 days to numbers that told stories beyond statistics. The Composite Special Forces unit performed professionally and competently according to all established standards. Their tactics were sound, their execution appropriate, their results within expected parameters for elite operators. However, the precision unit demonstrated capabilities that exceed established standards and suggest current tactical doctrine may require fundamental reassessment. Bridger studied the displays with expression that revealed internal calculations more complex than simple acknowledgement of superior performance. Colonel Vance, Master Sergeant Cross, your assessment regarding program continuation? Vance stepped forward with confidence that came from witnessing undeniable evidence. General, the precision unit has demonstrated not just competence, but innovation that advances tactical capability beyond current operational concepts. Eliminating this program would constitute institutional failure to recognize and develop methodologies that provide asymmetric advantages in complex operational environments. Cross added his evaluation with decades of authority behind every word. Sir, I came into this assessment skeptical about specialized sniper units versus broad capability special operations forces. The past 4 days have completely revised my understanding of what's possible when precision expertise is developed to this level. These women aren't just good shooters. They're tactical innovators who've created entirely new operational approaches. General Bridger stood before the assembled personnel in the operations center, his expression carrying the weight of decisions that would ripple through military doctrine for years to come. Behind him, displays still showed footage from the final hostage rescue, from minutes of flawless execution that had rendered 40 years of tactical assumptions obsolete through simple mechanism of superior performance. Captain Kensington, Major Drummond, he began, his voice carrying authority that came from rank, but humility that came from witnessing truth that contradicted expectations. This evaluation was designed to determine resource allocation based on operational effectiveness. The results have exceeded the parameters of that original question and forced examination of more fundamental issues regarding how we develop and deploy precision capabilities. Nadia stood at attention beside her team, professional composure maintained despite fatigue that came from 4 days of proving what should never have required proof. Drummond stood with his remaining operators. Their earlier antagonism, transformed through respect, earned the hardest way, through performance that left no room for argument or excuse. The precision unit will not only retain full funding, Bridger continued, but will receive expanded operational authority and responsibility for developing training protocols across all sniper programs. Additionally, I'm recommending the unit be enlarged to 12 personnel and given enhanced mission parameters that reflect capabilities demonstrated during this evaluation. He paused, looking directly at Drummond with expression that acknowledged difficult truths. Major Drummond, your team performed professionally throughout this evaluation. The fact that you were outperformed by a smaller unit employing revolutionary tactics reflects no deficiency in your capabilities or those of your operators. Rather, it demonstrates that military effectiveness evolves, and those who served us well yesterday must adapt to serve us better tomorrow. Drummond nodded acceptance of assessment that balanced recognition with reality. Sir, if I may speak freely. Proceed, Major. My team and I came into this evaluation with assumptions based on experience and doctrine. Captain Kensington's unit dismantled those assumptions through performance that demands we reconsider fundamental aspects of how we approach tactical operations. I formally request that my operators be given opportunity to cross-train with the precision unit to learn methodologies that clearly represent advancement in operational capability. The request carried significance beyond professional development. Acknowledgement from conventional forces that excellence transcended traditional boundaries and institutional evolution required setting aside pride in favor of effectiveness. Bridger considered the request briefly before nodding. Approved. Colonel Vance will coordinate joint training protocols beginning next quarter. Master Sergeant Cross will develop assessment criteria, ensuring lessons learned here inform broader strategic planning. He turned his attention to the full assembly, addressing not just the participants but the implications of what 4 days had revealed. What we witnessed this week represents more than one unit outperforming another. It demonstrates that capability and effectiveness aren't determined by conforming to established patterns, but by excellence applied through whatever methodology produces optimal results. The precision units succeeded not by being conventional operators who happen to be women, but by developing approaches that leverage their specific strengths into tactical advantages we hadn't conceptualized because we were constrained by assumptions about what methods work best. Lieutenant Carmine stepped forward, his earlier transformation from skeptic to advocate complete. "Sir, permission to add observation." "Granted, Lieutenant." This evaluation changed how I understand military effectiveness. I realized my assumptions about capability were based on familiarity rather than evidence. Captain Kensington's team forced me to recognize that excellence looks different than I'd been taught to expect, and that recognizing excellence requires setting aside preconceptions that limit our ability to see what's actually in front of us. His words carried weight that raw data couldn't convey. Personal testimony from someone who'd experienced paradigm shift through undeniable demonstration of capabilities that exceeded expectation. Captain Carlson added his own observation, voice carrying the rough honesty of someone admitting error publicly. "I owe Captain Kensington and her team an apology for dismissiveness based on bias rather than assessment. They didn't just prove me wrong, they demonstrated that my wrongness represented institutional failure to recognize and develop capabilities that make us more effective at the missions we're tasked with accomplishing. That's on me and on everyone who shares my former assumptions." The acknowledgments continued as various Special Forces operators stepped forward to offer respect earned through competition that stripped away everything except measurable performance. The transformation wasn't instant conversion, but genuine recognition that 4 days of evaluation had produced evidence too comprehensive to dismiss or explain away. Nadia accepted the recognition with grace that came from never seeking validation through comparison, but rather through excellence pursued for its own sake. She thought about the journey from Olympic biathlon to military service, from competition shooting to tactical operations, from being told certain things weren't possible to demonstrating that possible was just another limitation waiting to be exceeded. General Bridger concluded the formal debriefing with directives that would reshape training programs and operational planning across multiple commands. But before dismissal, he addressed the broader implications that extended beyond military context into questions about capability, recognition, and institutional evolution. This evaluation demonstrated that excellence transcends categories we try to impose on it. The precision units succeeded because they were exceptional operators who happened to be women, not despite being women or in some special category requiring different standards. They met the same standards everyone else meets and exceeded them through dedication, innovation, and capabilities developed to levels that redefined what we consider possible. As the assembly dispersed, Nadia found herself approached by operators who days earlier had dismissed her team as political accommodation rather than tactical asset. The conversations were brief, professional, but genuine in ways that formal recognition couldn't capture. Respect earned through demonstrated competence carried weight that mandated respect could never achieve. Vera stood beside Nadia as the operations center emptied, both women processing 4 days that had demanded everything they'd trained for and validated choices that had brought them to this moment. "We changed something here," Vera observed quietly. "Not just minds, but institutional understanding about capability and methodology, and what's possible when you stop limiting people based on assumptions. Imani joined them, youthful energy tempered by exhaustion and satisfaction. Think this changes anything beyond this evaluation? Beyond us? Nadia considered the question carefully before responding with honesty that acknowledged both achievement and ongoing work. We proved what we needed to prove here. But every woman who comes after us will still face skepticism, still need to demonstrate capability, still work twice as hard for the same recognition. What we changed is the existence proof that it's possible. What they'll change is making it normal. Linnea and Risa completed the gathering. 5 women who'd spent 4 days transforming theoretical capabilities into documented performance that would inform policy and training for years to come. The Nevada desert stretched beyond the operations center, vast and indifferent to human efforts to prove worth through measured competition. If you enjoyed this story and connected with the journey these women took, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character. Maybe you've witnessed similar situations where someone had to prove their capability despite already being exceptional. Maybe you know someone who showed hidden strength when underestimated. Share your thoughts and experiences, because stories like this matter not just for what they demonstrate, but for the conversations they start about excellence, recognition, and the ongoing work of ensuring capability is judged by performance rather than preconception. The sun set over Range Complex 7, painting the desert in colors that would fade, but leaving changes that would endure. 5 women had arrived facing elimination. They departed having demonstrated that the question was never whether they deserved to exist, but whether institutional thinking could evolve fast enough to recognize excellence that exceeded familiar patterns. The answer, documented across 4 days of undeniable performance, was that excellence didn't require permission to exist. It simply required opportunity to demonstrate what had always been possible for those willing to see it.